The Reverend Dr. Jonathan Roach is clergy. He's a part of the Hawaii Island Association. His wife, Jihe, is a chaplain with the hospice there, and that's actually the job that brought them out. So right now, Jonathan works for the state library system, and he's going to plug them a little bit because there's a book we all need to get to read, and I appreciate that. And Jonathan did his PhD work in clergy care. And during the Hawaii Island Mokopuni, he did a presentation there. And I thought this would be a great presentation to bring to the Fuller conference as well. And Jonathan was so kind in responding to that. He's actually taken time off from work today in order to be with us. And I do appreciate his commitment to the care of clergy here in Hawaii. So Jonathan, with that, we turn it over to you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. So plan for today is that I'll give a short 15-minute presentation, and then all the clergy and laity are going to be broken up into groups in breakout rooms with some discussion questions for some time of sharing, and then we'll come back and any insights or questions have a time for everyone to share. So I entitled this presentation's Burnout and Balaam's Donkey, and this was inspired by a UCC clergy person in the Florida conference from when I was doing my PhD research. And one of the things I would often ask clergy when I was talking to them about their work was what biblical character they were currently identifying with. And I would get answers like Moses, completely overworked, stretched too thin, Elijah, feeling abandoned and left alone, Jonah, completely conflicted, Mary and Martha, the pull between the mundane and the prayerful, Peter, like a rock, I never get it till it's over. And I would get Balaam from the book of Numbers. You know, Balaam was called by his king in Moab to come and curse the Israelites, and God told him no, he couldn't do it. He was to bless them. And so he was caught between his people who wanted one thing and God who was telling him another. But I had one clergy person who told me they most identified with Balaam's donkey. And if you read the scripture that I sent out with our invitation today, you'd be reminded that this is the story of the donkey. And Balaam is riding the donkey, and 3 times the angel of the Lord stands with an outreached sword in front of the donkey, and 3 times the donkey saves Balaam's life by moving out of the way and protecting her owner. And the clergy person told me that they felt like Balaam's donkey because they kept getting beaten up for doing the right thing, and it would take a divine miracle for their voice to be heard. So with that framework, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about clergy burnout. And when we're talking about clergy burnout, we're talking about a whole range of things that rip at our formation. All through our committees on ministries, our seminaries, our congregations all worked at building and forming us. But throughout our clergy careers, we're faced with a whole range of negative forces that rip away, they warp, they distort our formation, and they will keep ripping away at us until something breaks or we do something. So the pictures here on my presentation are of Darwin's Arch in the Galapagos Islands. And just a few weeks ago, it collapsed. So we have the before and after pictures. And so deformation is like an erosion. It eats away. I have this wonderful quote I want to share from Thornton, a wonderful theologian. It is still not unusual to come across the view that ordination or life vows bestows a kind of immunity from the effects of stress, and that The religious professional should not have symptoms of stress and anxiety, because it is assumed in such a belief that the symptoms of anxiety, stress, or depression mean that something has gone wrong with the individual's relationship with God or their spiritual and prayer life. And that's just simply wrong. Clergy experience burnout just as do helping professionals in education, in healthcare, and a whole range of fields. Around 60% of clergy will experience burnout in their career, and at any one time we can expect 15 to 20% of clergy to be in a state of burnout. And that was pre-pandemic. Now, burnout is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual exhaustion related to a person's job that leads to decreased motivation, negative attitudes towards self and job, lower job performance, and or compassion fatigue that gets worse over time. It normally starts with emotional exhaustion, and that's that feeling where you had a great night's sleep and you get out of bed and you just feel tired. You just look at the day and you say, I don't know if I have enough energy to do this. And then it progresses to depersonalization, which is a sense of bitterness that people are just taking from you and they're all takers. And then it leads to a lack of personal accomplishment. Everything I've done is meaningless. I haven't accomplished anything. And by the time a clergy person is there, it's time to seek a lot of help. The causes of burnout include work intensity, rapid change, chaos at work, work ambiguity, complexity, increased mundane work, work that you are not trained to do but need to do to make it work, like preaching into a video camera, running a Zoom meeting, understanding audio systems in an online environment, lack of control, situations that seem uncontrollable like pandemics, losing intrinsic satisfaction, a breakdown of a work community, working in isolation, conflicting values, a lack of support, a lack of fairness in work. Burnout happens to normal clergy who do not have a history of mental or emotional problems. Clergy who are the most likely to experience burnout are the most passionate, the most loving, the most caring, the most deeply committed, and the ones who are the most invested in ministry. These are the people who exemplify love of God and love of neighbor. Now, lukewarm, mediocre clergy almost never experience burnout. Now, an interesting factor in burnout is if you have a Master of Divinity, you are more likely to burn out than a person who's in ministry without a master's or a person who has earned a doctorate. Now, burnout can happen anytime in a clergy person's career, but there are three particular times when clergy are most susceptible to burnout. During the first 24 months of a first call, 6 to 8 years into a ministry at a setting, which is why we see so many transitions at that point, and from age 54 through retirement. Also, during periods of high, prolonged stress, like the last year and a half. Now, the traditional approaches to clergy burnout has been to give the clergy a survey test to prove that they're experiencing burnout to them. But research shows that clergy actually know when they're in a state of burnout and don't need a test. Then, after being told that they're burned out, we typically teach skills like working smarter, time management, organizational skills. We tell people to take better self-care of themselves. Self-help therapies, we suggest adding a new hobby. And the problems with this approach, besides it doesn't work, is that it leads to feelings of guilt, blame, self-dislike, and spiritual dryness. Again, this all sounds good, but this does not work according to research. What really does work is self-care that fosters change. So self-care that helps people clear their minds and give voice to what they're feeling. Observing a Sabbath, creativity and play, talking and being listened to about your work, reconnecting with God and your sense of call, regular, disciplined, spiritual exercises, being in spiritual direction, practicing healthy professional boundaries, building support systems, especially with other clergy that you feel safe with and who will actually listen, earning a doctorate, taking another unit of CPE, holistic responses that address the body, the mind, the spirit, and the intellect. It has to be holistic. And finally, develop your own theology of work, which is what I did with a group of UCC clergy in my dissertation. Now, at this stage in the pandemic, we have to remind people that we're still in a pandemic, that we're returning to a new normal, and that return means more transitions, more changes, more fear, worry, and stress. And we have to start talking about the after effects of the pandemic. The impact of a prolonged stress event just don't go away. The day after a major trauma surgery, you just can't return to your old lifestyle and go out running or biking. Life has changed. I believe that this will play out over the next 2 years, and we have to address aftercare and our plans to get us back functioning and healthy in light of the trauma we have experienced. Now, what congregations can do is make time to listen. And this is not problem solving. This is not trying to fix the situation. Just listen. Be there. And this is where I'm going to do a book pitch for a children's book. This book, The Rabbit Listened, a children's book. It's a picture book. You can read it in 5 minutes. It does a better job of explaining the ministry of presence than anything back there on those shelves. I have thousands of volumes of theology and biblical study. This children's book does a better job of explaining a ministry of presence. It would be a great one to read with your board of deacons after they get over the shock that you're reading them a children's book. And I can guarantee this book is in the public library system here in the state. You can go to any of the 51 library branches and request it, and they can get you a copy of this book. I know because I purchased it and gotten it into the libraries. This is a great time for your pastoral relations committee or your deacons to listen, to talk about clergy work experiences, to encourage, to celebrate, to develop the spiritual gifts, to make time to make sure that all of our clergy have professional development time and resources, that they're taking their sabbaticals and their Sabbath days, and that the whole congregation is practicing the priesthood of all believers. Now, what can clergy do? We can remember that we're not called to be messiahs. We already have one. We're just disciples. We are not messiahs. We can ask for help. We can talk about how we're feeling and what we are experiencing. We can make time and space for spiritual practices. We can reconnect with our sense of call, considering spiritual direction, consider starting a doctorate or taking another unit of CPE, which I know seems counterintuitive because you're already feeling completely overwhelmed, and this would be adding more to your plate. But the research does show this helps. Building your support network with other clergy who listen. And playing, being creative. So the questions I have for our small groups to consider: how has the pandemic impacted your sense of call and pastoral identity? What kind of emotional highs and lows have you experienced ministering during the pandemic? Is there any positive or beneficial aspect to how the pandemic has changed your work that you want to hold on to? And you can always go back to one of my favorites. What biblical character are you identifying with today and why? For laity who are joining us, how can your congregation support your clergy during the pandemic? How can you promote teamwork in your congregation through the priesthood of all believers? What plans do you need for aftercare? So I'll lead those up into this on the screen. And Lori is putting us into breakout rooms, and we should all be going to our little group discussions. Enjoy, and remember that our conversations are between professionals, and let's respect each other and not share anything over the dinner table later today. So any insights or things that people would have to share from their group time?
Well, I'll just say that it's obvious to me that we share much more in small groups, which much more willing to share when we're in very small groups than when in larger groups. And I think that's really a message to how we do ministry, because I just have known for years that people will say things in different environments and in different settings in terms of group size. And that's been a pretty important part of our ministry at Koloa Union Church, is making sure that people have some opportunities to do things and say things in smaller groups.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Thank you.
I was so glad to hear that there were strong positive experiences despite the negative experiences that everybody goes through. That ministry has in some ways become even more, how shall I say it? More exciting, clearer in purpose, focused, even though there are the downsides of the separation. I'm glad to hear that for many churches, they will continue to have this kind of distant worship, virtual worship.
Thank you.
We had a lot of affirmation for one another that, you know, what we've been going through over this last year is real, and it is hard, and it is really hard. I have to admit, I don't think we remembered to even deal with the question of unexpected benefits or blessings. But there were definitely there was definitely an interesting collection of biblical characters. And we definitely had in Ezekiel who people don't want to listen to, and Apostle Paul in the middle of the storm and not actually certain whether the boat would make it.
Mm-hmm.
We focused all of our time on unexpected benefits, different from your group. And I was actually pretty inspired by the resilience of the clergy. One thing that I'm mindful of and monitor in my own life, and will be monitoring in some colleagues that I am in regular dialogue with, is the impact of this year longer term. I think that we've been through a lot that we've sublimated a lot in the process that will have some longer term effects that may come up. It doesn't have to be PTSD, but something like that. You know, it's sort of like emerging from what will life be like as we move forward and as we regain a sense of some sense of normalcy.
Thank you.
I think one of the things is the ability to gather as a clergy, even through Zoom, and have that ability to learn from one another and support one another. I mean, I've learned a lot. I've gotten a lot of ideas in how to do virtual worship for many of the voices that are gathered here. So that was a huge plus.
Thank you to everyone. And as we prepare to end this session, I invite all of us to approach God, to be in the presence of our Creator. And let us listen. This is a selection from Reflection on Ministry from the book Practical Prophet. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter in and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. So let us go into the rest of this week with God's blessing and the realization of us as workers who are doing good work. So thank you all very much. Any last questions?
Thank you, Jonathan, for your time today and for guiding us through these type of discussions. I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you that are gathered here. As we say in the United Church of Christ, our basic unit of mission, right? How we go about being God's transformative presence in the world is through the local church and through the local church pastor. So thank you for that commitment to your call and to your church and to the community that you are busy being a part of that transformative power in. If you have no other questions for Jonathan or thoughts for Jonathan, thank you and aloha.